Hello and welcome to this video on creating a spirit wash for cold weather. This video complements a video linked above that will help you in creating a spirit wash for hot weather. Unlike summer or even the more balanced spring and autumn, winter has its own challenges that are unable to be overcome with the same solutions. The most pressing concern in winter is the cold. Although obvious, it is a wide-reaching problem with many complications. Fixing these or overcoming them can be difficult if you take a brute force approach. Heating your home to resemble spring is going to be difficult and expensive. If you want to see how extreme the effective temperature fluctuations are, try baking bread with live yeast. Leaving the bread on your bench for a few hours is more than enough time in spring and autumn. In summer, you may only need an hour. In this time, it will rise and be ready to go into the oven. Winter is different. Often you'll have to seek out a good place for your bread where it will be warm enough. You can recreate this effect by leaving it in the fridge. It may take several hours more to rise than it would in any other circumstance. You may even need to leave it overnight. For home brewing, it is an interesting and related story. Beer is the best example. Traditionally, each season is associated with a beer type. Ale is a summer brew, requiring higher temperatures to process the sugar into alcohol. Conversely, something like lager was traditionally a winter or cellar brewed beer. It relied on the constantly cooler environment to process sugar into alcohol. This is the first avenue open to you in winter. Use it to be creative and deviate from your usual beer and brewing options. A lager yeast strain can be used to great effect in brewing a standard beer. If this is not something you would normally do or have done yet, take your opportunity over winter to give it a try. This raises the first option you have in addressing the cold: choosing a suitable yeast strain. Obviously, lager yeast is an option. History has effectively shown this to be the best course of action. Lager benefits from the cold environment. This creates a slower metabolism and creates a more resilient yeast strain. This means you can aim much higher with alcohol profile, among other interesting variations. Then you have hybrid species of yeast. These are more interesting and specific scenarios apply to them. The other option here is somewhat more random in how well it works. Pitching more yeast. A lot more yeast through a starter culture. This will help in overcoming the limitations of how much sugar can be fermented in the limited time another yeast type has going for it. It may also lead to more stuck fermentations, odd-tasting brew, and many other complications. This really does reinforce the benefit of working with a lager strain in the colder weather. The key with lager, as with most yeast, is the constantly cooler description. Cellars are a similar temperature at all times. This is well below room temperature for most buildings, but not so far as to be freezing or deleterious to lager yeast in particular. This is something you will want to emulate. The problem is that cellars are now rare. If you have one, great. For everyone else, there are several options that do not involve heating your entire home for the sake of brewing. The first option is not always practical. Move your fermentation operation to somewhere where it is warmer. Is there a better space for fermenting in winter, and can you set up there? Sometimes this can be done, especially if you are only looking at making a small batch, or you want to test something very specific in a small quantity. For other cases, this will not work, but other options may. Space blanket material, or as it is more commonly called, mylar sheeting, can be wrapped around your fermenters. It will make your brewing look like a grow house, but it will also help to radiate heat back at your fermenters. As the yeast progresses through the sugar metabolism, it will raise the temperature by up to 5 degrees centigrade. Reflecting the heat back into your vessel from this, and the addition of warm water or substrate during your setup, will keep it warm for far longer. This will allow you the time and ability to use other methods, or less difficult options, at less expense to keep your brew going. The alternative to this is an insulated box. This can be lined with polystyrene or polyfoam, cut to fit the box and fermenter, or more creative versions with better insulation and appearances. The next option involves directly heating a single vessel, something like a 25-litre or 6-gallon fermenter. Heating pads are readily available from your homebrew stores and online. They provide a constant heat at the base of your vessel, much like an electric blanket. You should not put your vessel directly on these. Heating pads have specific drawbacks. The first is production of undesirable compounds. These adversely affect the flavour. This is a result of the yeast cake at the bottom being revived slightly by your heating pad, but not by so much as to keep the entire batch warm. This is not adjustable in most cases, but some heating pads may come with a thermocontroller. But in general, this means no temperature-specific control without investing in extra equipment. This means you may be overshooting or undershooting the degree to which you wish to warm your fermenter. The next option is a variation on heat pads, but wraps around your fermenter. These are fermenting wraps and belts. They perform much the same purpose as heating pads, but they go around the vessel rather than underneath. By positioning them higher or lower on the body of your fermenter, you can modify the amount of heat going into your brew to a certain degree. This is a broad range of temperature, but more specific than a heating pad. They have an advantage over heating pads by avoiding the yeast cake problem to some degree, and the consequential off flavors. They do, however, still suffer from a lack of thermocontroller in most cases. The final simple solution to brewing in the cold is to use something like a cabinet, or ideally an old fridge or freezer. Place an incandescent bulb in your container and leave it on. These older light bulbs produce a surprising amount of heat, and in a confined space can keep the heat at a level where your fermentation can continue. There are some important notes on fermenting in the cold. The first of these is to try and avoid glass vessels. They have a much better heat transfer value than things like plastic. They can also crack under the temperature changes. This creates a twofold reason to avoid the use of glass when brewing in the cold. The second and final note on dealing with the cold in your home brew is the problem of fluctuating temperatures. The cold will cause your yeast to drop out of suspension. This will happen even quicker if the temperature is going from warm to cold and back again. You need to aim at keeping your brew at a constant or near constant temperature with very little fluctuation. To see this problem at work, start a batch of yeast culture. Get it going strong for several days. Now move it into your fridge. As with a regular fermentation, you'll see in under 12 hours you will have gone from a hazy solution to a clear one with a yeast cake at the bottom of your vessel. The cold will cause your yeast to drop out of suspension, or more likely flocculate. This is hard to fix once it occurs. Thank you for watching this video. If it has been of interest, consider liking, sharing and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions or suggestions below.